Rachel filed for divorce via express courier, no note, no explanation. Just a shaky signature in blue ink beneath the header, Agreement of Final Separation. I received it at 4:17 a.m., moments after pulling a child from the wreckage of a collapsed cabin in the Caribou Mountains. The rain hadn't stopped. My boots were heavy with mud, but the hollow inside me was worse than any terrain I'd ever crossed. Matteo said nothing when he handed me the envelope. He stood there soaked to the bone in the crimson haze of the rescue truck's taillights, then turned and walked back towards the base. I sat on the tailgate, fingers trembling, not from the cold. I slit the envelope with a thumbnail. Inside were 4 notarized pages, including a property transfer agreement Rachel had signed. The house we rebuilt 6 years ago in Kingston, the one we laid floorboards for together, had been transferred to an entity named MK Logistics. I'd never heard of them, but the address on the document was mine. Taped to the last page was a USB. I plugged it into my laptop. The satellite link was weak, but the file opened. It was footage from our dining room. Rachel wore a red dress, seated with 3 unfamiliar women, wine glasses full, cheap jazz in the background, her voice clear and measured. This time I chose me. I've lived long enough in someone else's shadow. I'm finally free, don't have to ask permission to breathe. She laughed. That laugh used to belong to me. I closed the laptop. No words, no shouts, no broken furniture. I simply drove back to base, washed, my face changed, and sat at the pine desk. Then typed 1 line to Elliot. Jang subject, activate Plan D. She can't know. I hit send, then stepped out into the cold again. The wind carried ash and pine and wet stone. The mountain still groaned under its own weight. But I heard none of it. There was a new silence now, one colder than snow, quieter than death. Not heartbreak, not sadness. Just the understanding that the woman who once called me her world had listed me under assets to be separated. I didn't sleep that night. I stared at the ceiling of the barracks until the first light of dawn leaked through the frost-slicked window. By then, I'd memorized every clause in that agreement, every word Rachel had never spoken. But grief, real grief, doesn't begin with the final blow. It starts with the echo of things once said, once meant. That's when I began rewinding, not to find where it went wrong, but to remember when it felt right. We met in the winter of 2012 beneath a string of frozen patio lights at a charity ski auction in Banff. She was balancing a glass of red in one hand, the other tucked into the wool pocket of a coat, too elegant for the Rockies. I was 6 weeks out of service, and 6 months from knowing what to do with myself. Her name was Rachel Lambert. She told me she worked in accounting for a mid-sized freight company based out of Kingston. Mostly I audit fuel receipts, she'd said, and argue about coffee budgets. She smiled like it cost her nothing. I was only in town to see a friend, but I stayed an extra day. We spent the next morning walking along the riverbank buttes, crunching over snow that hadn't yet turned gray. I didn't talk much. She didn't mind. Rachel liked that I didn't feel the need to impress. I liked that she didn't feel the need to be impressed. We married 8 months later. It wasn't grand, just 20 people in a church basement, with more draft than heat, but it was ours. We bought a fixer-upper in a quiet corner of Kingston. Peeling siding old plumbing attic, insulation that smelled like mouse urine. We loved it more than we should have. Rachel said she felt safe with me. Like I can breathe, she whispered once while painting the hallway lilac, a color I hated but never said out loud. I trust you to keep us upright. And I did. I took a position with the Provincial Search and Rescue Unit, low pay but noble work. Rachel took over the household finances. I let her, trusted her. She was sharp with numbers, and I preferred the silence of maps and weather reports. We built routines: Thursday curry nights, Sunday laundry, backyard fire pits in October. The life we had wasn't glamorous, but it was steady, and steady, I believed, was enough. For a time it was. Our first anniversary gift to each other was sweat equity, replacing every window frame by hand. By our second, we'd paid off her student debt. By the third, we adopted a retired German shepherd named Bailey, who would later die before I knew my marriage had. There were cracks, of course. No house is flawless. But I mistook them for settling. The sort of creaks and shifts you learn to live with. Looking back, the signs weren't subtle. I was just in love, and love makes lousy auditors. I started keeping copies of every receipt, not to confront her, just to understand. I wasn't suspicious, not in the classic sense. No perfume on collars, no midnight texts. Just a quiet drift, a series of unremarkable disconnections that together felt like drowning. Rachel began referring to our plans as hers: her garden, her guest room, her idea to install French doors, which I paid for, and she picked out alone. She removed our wedding photo from the hallway and replaced it with a framed map of Toronto real estate prices. When I asked if she missed the way things used to be, she said, "Used to be isn't coming back, Trav." I didn't know if that meant the world or us. Around this time, I noticed she stopped asking about my missions. She used to wait up texts like "home yet" or "was it bad?" But now, nothing. I could be gone for 3 days and she'd greet me with a nod. One evening, I found her crying in the kitchen, not sobbing, just silent tears over a glass of whiskey. I touched her shoulder. She flinched. When I asked what was wrong, she said nothing. "I'm just tired of always waiting." I told her I could ask for fewer deployments. She shook her head. "No, I don't want you to change. I just don't want to have to keep changing for you either." I didn't sleep that night. The next week, she enrolled in a 2-month course called Financial Independence for Professional Women, run online by Marissa's network. The same day, she canceled our shared Netflix and opened a personal account. She began using the term portfolio assets, said she might want to move her RRSP into something less traditional. I didn't push. I didn't even know what pushing would look like anymore. I made some changes too, nothing confrontational, just protective. I opened a second checking account in my name only, rerouted my SAR stipends and hazard pay into it, started scanning every legal document we owned: marriage certificate, house, deed, pension agreement, and backed them up to an encrypted drive. I moved my father's old war medals and my late mother's letters into a locked file box under the bed. Rachel never noticed. Or if she did, she said nothing. Then came the Whistler retreat. 4 days. No contact. "It's a media-free zone," she'd said, kissing me on the cheek to recalibrate. She came back different. Not happier, not sadder, just vacant. Like she'd made peace with something I hadn't been told about. I offered to pick her up at the train station. She said, "No, Marissa's driving me." I watched them through the window as they unloaded luggage. Marissa touched her elbow in a way that made me think of generals, not friends. Later that week, Rachel told me she wanted to reevaluate how we managed our finances. "I think we should each take full control of our own accounts," she said over grilled salmon. "It's just cleaner." "Are you planning to leave?" I asked. "No," she said. "I'm planning not to get stuck." The words didn't sting. Not then. Not immediately. But they did stay. And when she said one cold January evening that she might go stay with her sister in Peterborough for space, I didn't argue. I asked when. She said soon. 2 weeks later, I was called up to assist with the Caribou landslides. It was a multi-jurisdictional effort, likely 10 days. I packed my gear quietly. Rachel walked me to the car. No hugs, no blessing. Just this, don't forget your gloves. It'll be cold. I left before sunrise. Rachel stood in the doorway, arms crossed over her robe, backlit by the kitchen light. She didn't step outside, didn't offer to help with my gear, just leaned on the frame like it didn't belong to her anymore. "You'll be in touch," she asked. "Always," I said. She nodded as if that settled something. I waited for her to say more. She didn't. As I drove west toward the highway, I glanced in the rearview mirror. She was still in the doorway, shrinking behind me like a detail being erased. Something in me knew I wouldn't be coming home the same. The drive to base took 6 hours. I replayed her voice in my head the entire time, not the words, but the tone. Detached, administrative, like someone closing a file. At the operations center, I met with the joint SIR team crews from BC, Alberta, and federal liaison officers. The mission was clear multiple communities stranded after a massive landslide in the Caribou. Heavy rain, washed out roads, zero visibility in certain zones. We were setting up outposts, coordinating airlifts, managing civilian rescue. I focused. It was easy to do when the world was ending around you. What wasn't easy was the silence at night. When we weren't digging or flying, we waited in converted gyms, half-collapsed ranger stations, inside our own heads. I watched teammates call home FaceTime kids, share photos of baby scans and anniversary cakes. I stopped checking my phone. Rachel hadn't messaged, not even a generic "be safe." Then one night, Mateo Cruz, my bunkmate and team lead, sat down beside me during a 1 a.m. meal break. He was chewing beef jerky and scrolling through his messages. "You all right?" he asked, not looking up. "Fine." He nodded. "Just, you've been quieter than usual. I guess I've been loud before." He chuckled, not loud, just present. "You're somewhere else this week." I thought about lying. Then I didn't. "She filed for divorce," I said. He stopped chewing. "Last week." He stared at me for a long beat. "Damn." I nodded. "Yeah." He didn't offer sympathy. He just asked, "What do you need?" That question sat with me for hours. What did I need? Anger, revenge, clarity. None of it felt right. What I needed, what I always needed, was to understand. So I did what I'd been trained to do. I started gathering data. I sent Elliot, the lawyer who helped me draft my will 5 years ago, an encrypted message: initiate Plan D. No exposure. I hadn't meant for it to be used. Plan D was a failsafe, a set of triggers in case of financial misappropriation. I created it after reading a case about a soldier whose ex-wife remortgaged their house while he was deployed. I'd thought it was paranoid at the time. Apparently not. Elliot replied within 2 hours, acknowledged. Full audit in motion. Will update within 48 hours. Be safe, Mac. I was already halfway into something I hadn't planned, but was fully prepared for. 2 days later, I received a secure file from Elliot. A company named MK Logistics had been incorporated 6 months earlier. Registered to a co-working space in Toronto. Listed director, Marissa Kwan. 3 months after that, Rachel had donated our furniture as an in-kind asset. Weeks later, she signed a letter of intent to reposition property into a subsidiary account, all without my name on any document. The final attachment was an image Rachel and Marissa standing outside our house smiling with a third man. His name as per caption, Daryl Knox. I didn't recognize him, yet, but something inside me went still. Not broken, not devastated, just still. the kind of still that comes before a storm. Silence doesn't end things, it preserves them. In the nights between missions, I didn't dream of Rachel. I dreamt of the floor tiles in our kitchen, the uneven one near the fridge, the flickering hallway bulb I never got around to replacing. Her handwriting on the whiteboard calendar, March 17th, oil change. I hadn't been erased. I'd been quietly archived. When betrayal is soft-spoken and well-dressed, it takes longer to name. But by the time I'd charted every transfer, watched every clip, and stitched each invoice into a story, I realized something simple and brutal. I wasn't her mistake. I was her strategy. That meant this wasn't heartbreak anymore. This was war, just written in contracts. I didn't call the agent. I called the land registry. A formal complaint was filed within the hour, alleging unauthorized listing of jointly owned property. Elliot attached the freeze request. LeBlanc submitted his dossier, and I provided the deed with my sole signature on file. Logan Firth didn't see it coming. That evening I received a voicemail. "Travis, it's Rachel. Can you please call me back? Something strange is happening with the house. I don't know what's going on." Logan's confused. "Just call me, please." I didn't. Instead, I sent Elliot one last request. "Bring in FinTrack. It's time." The next 24 hours moved fast. RCMP opened a review into MK Logistics under suspicion of layered asset laundering. Marissa's name reappeared in a parallel probe tied to 3 similar companies in Alberta and Nova Scotia. LeBlanc emailed one line, "You may have just cracked a 3-province scheme." And then came the twist. One of Marissa's early clients, a woman named Stephanie Carr, contacted Elliot after seeing a social media thread LeBlanc discreetly prompted. Stephanie had sold her home on Marissa's advice after her husband deployed to Latvia with the KAF. 3 months later, the buyer flipped it to a corporate entity at 30% markup. The company LK Holdings. Same as ours. She never saw a dime beyond the initial check. Stephanie's affidavit became part of our civil filing. Now it wasn't just fraud. It was a pattern. Rachel's role wasn't just passive anymore. She had signed on to a system. Even if she didn't invent it, she operated it. That night, I watched a video I hadn't opened before. LeBlanc had recovered it from a business coaching stream. Rachel sat front row. Marissa stood at the whiteboard. Asset freedom. Marissa said starts with identifying emotional liabilities. Rachel raised her hand. "What if the liability still thinks you love him?" Marissa smiled. "Then you're not done extracting yet." Everyone laughed. Rachel too. I closed my laptop. My hands were steady. I wasn't angry. I was ready. We moved fast. By Thursday morning, Elliot filed a civil suit for breach of fiduciary trust. Attached were 5 exhibits: Rachel's transfers, her role in MK Logistics, the altered joint account trail, and the unauthorized attempt to liquidate the property. LeBlanc hand-delivered a package to the regional office of the Ontario Securities Commission. Inside printouts of the financial movements Rachel signed off on, accompanied by Marissa's coaching video transcript. And I called no one. I let the paper speak for me. That evening, a courier delivered an envelope to my motel room in Prince George. Inside, a handwritten note, Rachel's pen. "You win." I never meant for it to be ugly. Can we talk? No signature, no apology. I folded it and slid it beneath my coffee mug. The next morning, RCMP investigators visited MK Logistics' co-working office in Toronto. Found it empty. Business cards still on the desk. Lease unpaid. Logan Firth, the agent, was subpoenaed as a witness. claimed he was misled by his client and acted in good faith. No charges for now. But the pressure worked. 2 other women came forward, both ex-military spouses, both advised by Marissa. Both had homes sold below valuation for liquidity and channeled into LK Holdings. Same structure, same destination, same silence. Only now we were loud. Back at the SAR base, I stood beside Mateo watching a Chinook chopper land on a clearing we'd flattened for evac. He looked at me sideways. "You good now?" "No," I said, "but I'm in position." He grinned. "That's more dangerous." Later that day, I filed one final document, a motion, to freeze all related assets tied to Rachel Lambert under suspicion of collusion in financial exploitation. It wasn't about revenge. It was about ending the cycle. They'd built a system assuming no one would notice. They were wrong. The most dangerous part of war isn't the first shot. It's the silence before you know who fired it. We'd moved quickly, paperwork, filings, warnings. The machine had turned. But systems don't bleed, people do. And the people behind this one weren't running. They were regrouping. The email came at 5:11 a.m. Subject: unusual activity, action required. Sender: Clara Jong, Regional Risk Officer, Northern Pines Credit Union. I clicked. Mr. McConnell, I apologize for the intrusion. As the registered account holder on file for 204659, I am required to inform you of a flagged transaction involving a foreign wire instruction issued under your name. If this request was not initiated by you, please contact us immediately. Attached is a copy of the routing form. I opened the attachment. A wire transfer request, 41 torn $200 CAD, to a fintech firm in the Cayman Islands. Originating account, a joint business fund under McConnell RKL Limited. I'd never heard of it, but the signature. It looked disturbingly like mine. I called Elliot, sent him the file. He looped in LeBlanc. Within 2 hours, we'd confirmed McConnell RKL Limited was an unregistered shell. It used a Kingston mailing address tied to a storage unit. The wire was processed using a digital scan of my signature one, likely lifted from our house deed. Rachel hadn't just misused access. She'd created an entity in my name. The bank agreed to freeze the transaction, but it was a warning, not a mistake. Later that day, I logged into our old home's smart system. She hadn't changed the password. The front door camera caught everything. At 7:02 p.m., the night before, Rachel arrived with a case of wine. Daryl opened the door. Marissa followed 10 minutes later. They ordered Thai food. They toasted to international expansion. At 7:44 p.m., Daryl raised a glass to letting dead weight go. Rachel clinked his. I closed the video. Not out of rage, out of strategy. I spent the next 3 hours building a file, screenshots, transaction logs, IP addresses from the wire transfer form. Elliot reviewed them while LeBlanc began searching for connections between MK Logistics and offshore funnels. The results came back with a name I didn't expect. Rachel Lambert was listed as legal coordinator on a crypto wallet exchange license filed in Vancouver. It was recent, barely 2 months old. The same month she'd sent me the divorce papers. She wasn't just escaping, she was establishing control elsewhere. Around noon, Mateo walked into the trailer with 2 coffees. You've been staring at that screen for hours, watching something die slowly. He sipped. Looks like you're planning a funeral. No, I said. An interception. He didn't ask. That evening, I left base with permission 10 hours off-grid. I drove south in a borrowed pickup with a tool chest in the back and a flashlight taped to the dashboard. I arrived in Kingston just past midnight. The house still looked like mine from a distance. Up close, it was already foreign. New porch furniture, A doormat that said, "Manifest it." Lights on upstairs. I didn't go to the door. I went to the side panel, unscrewed the housing of the smart hub, installed a backup chip, synced the feed to a cloud Elliot had secured earlier that week. Inside, they were asleep. Good. Let them rest. I had work to do. Back in the truck, I opened a secure chat to LeBlanc. She's registering internationally. Crypto-based holdings. Possible evasion. Next step. His reply was immediate: follow the co-director trail. These entities don't exist in isolation. I'll run Knox. By morning, he'd found it. Daryl Knox was co-director of a holding firm in Alberta that went dormant in 2022 after a lawsuit was filed by a woman named Erin Hall. The case: fraudulent asset restructuring during a contested divorce. Same pattern. Erin was a nurse, deployed as part of a humanitarian rotation in Honduras. Came back to find her house sold under urgent liquidity terms. The buyer, a numbered company tied to Logan Firth. Knox never responded to the suit. Settled privately, no charges laid. But now we had a chain. And I was the last link. Fraud isn't always a crime of greed. Sometimes it's a crime of convenience committed by people who think you'll never fight back. But I wasn't negotiating anymore. I was closing gaps. And the next gap was sitting in a law firm that had known too much too early. The name came from a retainer document LeBlanc pulled from Rachel's banking records. Gilmore and Pratt LLP, a mid-tier legal firm in downtown Kingston, known for specializing in high-privacy asset transition, which in plain English meant we'll help you hide things as long as it's technically legal. Rachel had signed with them 2 months before she filed for divorce. That was the tell. I made an appointment under a pseudonym, said I was interested in opening a discretionary trust. They assigned me a junior partner, Brandon Kerr. Polished, confident, no wedding ring. In his office, I asked him what protections were available if my spouse didn't know I was moving assets. He smiled. Technically, quite a few. I asked what the firm's past clients had done. He smiled again. Legally, I can't say, but you'd be surprised how many people prepare before the storm, not during it. That was enough. I stood, shook his hand, walked out, and sent Elliot a message, confirmed. She planned the entire thing before I deployed. 2 nights later, Daryl Knox showed up at my SR base. He didn't come inside. He waited at the parking lot fence, arms folded, leaning against a blue Civic. I saw him from the break room window. I walked out. He didn't flinch. "McConnell," he said like we were teammates. "You're trespassing. I just want to talk. Wrong battlefield." He stepped closer. "You're burning a lot of bridges for someone who's already alone." I didn't answer. He pulled something from his pocket. An envelope. Just read it, walk away. "You'll come out of this fine." I took the envelope. Didn't open it, just said leave. He did. I burned the envelope unopened. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I reviewed the envelope Daryl had handed me. Not its contents, I'd burned those, but the exterior. A return address label. Discreet, too discreet. Elliot traced it to a mail forwarding company in Ottawa. One of many used by firms who wanted to look local but operate far from sight. Marissa had one too. LeBlanc's report came in the next morning. MK Logistics had filed paperwork to expand as an international coaching entity. Registered branch Belize. Listed representative Rachel Lambert. The form was signed the week I deployed. Later that day, I met Clara Zhang in person. She worked in compliance for Northern Pines. Young, meticulous, overqualified. She looked like she'd rather be building something than babysitting broken systems. She showed me a series of small flags. Account 52, registered jointly by McConnell RKL, made 5 transfers to Bellegarde Consulting. Bellegarde Consulting led to a trust, which led to Knox. The most recent file listed Marissa Kwan as a temporary third-party advisor. "How long have you known?" I asked. Clara hesitated. "Your wife came in months ago. She said you wanted to build something new." She seemed confident. I nodded. "Do you think I knew?" "No," Clara said quietly. "But we're trained not to ask. That night I called LeBlanc. I'm done tracking." "What do you want?" he asked. "To surface it. All of it." He paused. "That'll put her in the blast radius. She put herself there. We designed a trap. Simple, legal, watertight." I contacted Rachel under a burner number, used a soft voice. "Tired," I said, confused, willing to let go if I get clean terms. She responded in 3 minutes, said she wanted to meet, suggested a coffee shop near the financial district. "Just us," she wrote. I agreed, but I wasn't going alone. Before the meeting, I reached out to Inspector Regan. He wasn't on the official payroll anymore. Early retirement following an internal review that wasn't his fault, but cost him his badge. Why he tried to charge Marissa Kwan 4 years ago. Failed. "She doesn't leave fingerprints," he said over the phone. "But she always leaves shadows. You have to record the shadows." He agreed to be in place near the cafe. He didn't need a badge to call in the right people if something went sideways. "You sure she'll come?" he asked. "She thinks she's still winning." I arrived early, checked the sightlines. Windows clean, exit routes mapped. Rachel walked in 10 minutes late wearing a cream-colored coat and no wedding ring. She looked sharper, like someone who'd chosen her shape. "Travis," she said, sitting. No hug. No apology. "You asked to meet," I replied. She exhaled like she'd just gotten off a treadmill. "I just want this to end. The fighting, the freezing accounts, the drama. You don't deserve to be punished, but I don't want to be punished either. You forged my name. I positioned assets. Same thing." "No," she said, tilting her head. "It's only fraud if you didn't intend to rebuild something." I stared at her for a long time. "You think you rebuilt. I think I escaped." I let the silence stretch until I saw her eyes flick to her watch. She was waiting for someone. And right on cue, Daryl entered from the side door, sat at the bar, didn't look at us. But he was there. So was Reagan. So was LeBlanc. So were 2 plainclothes FinTrack agents. I reached for my phone, hit record, then said, "Tell me about Belize, tell me about Belize." Rachel blinked. Her smile faltered. "That's not what we came here to talk about. It is for me." She leaned back, eyes narrowed. "You're recording this, aren't you?" I didn't answer, but I didn't stop. I know about the offshore filings, the crypto wallets, the training seminars with asset liberation coaching. I know you opened the company 2 months before I left. I know you met Daryl at a retreat run by Marissa. I know you drafted separation terms before we even had an argument," she laughed. A short, humorless sound. "Travis, if you wanted to hurt me, you could have just done it like a normal man. Throw my clothes on the lawn, change the locks. But this, I said, isn't about you anymore." I nodded toward the bar. Daryl stood, so did the agents. In 10 seconds, the entire room shifted. FinTrack moved in. Inspector Regan stepped forward with a badge he wasn't supposed to carry anymore, but still did. LeBlanc followed behind, filming every second with a discreet GoPro, mounted on his lapel. Rachel stood too late. Daryl tried to bolt, didn't make it past the espresso machine. Outside, the air smelled like spring and fire alarms. Rachel sat cuffed on the curb, her cream coat bunched under her. She didn't cry, but her mouth kept moving like she was explaining something to no one. Marissa wasn't there, but her name was. everywhere. Back at base, I sat alone in the gear room. Mateo entered quietly, handed me a sealed folder. RCMP courier dropped this off. Inside were 5 affidavits, 3 from former spouses, 2 from ex-employees, all naming Marissa Darrell and Rachel as central players in what one woman called a network of freedom fraud. That woman was Erin Hall. She'd found her voice. And now, so had the system. Rachel sat in silence, wrists cuffed, as FinTrack agents wrapped yellow tape around the perimeter of the cafe. Darrell had been led away in a separate cruiser, silent jaw, set refusing to meet her eyes. I watched from a bench across the street, not hiding, not gloating, just measuring the moment. She looked smaller than I remembered. Not thinner, just reduced, like a house stripped of its walls. Regan sat down beside me. "You've just brought down a ring that's been operating for 6 years," he said. "They brought themselves down." He nodded slowly. "Even so, people like this, Marissa Darrell, your wife, they assume silence. They count on confusion, shame. You didn't give them that. I gave them time," I said, "and you documented every minute." Back at Base LeBlanc, and Elliot began the real work. Their report, compiled for the Attorney General's office, was 74 pages. Itemized wire fraud, misrepresentation, unlawful asset redirection, identity falsification, and conspiracy to defraud through emotional coercion. Each item traced, each name backed by footage, banking logs, or witness statements. Rachel's fingerprints were on every page. The charges wouldn't be light, but the decision to press them, that was still mine. I sat with that knowledge for days, not out of doubt, out of weariness. Mateo found me one evening in the workshop, sanding the handle of a rescue axe I'd meant to gift Rachel years ago. He said nothing for a while, then, "You going to court, I already did. I mean personally." I looked up. She stopped being my wife long before the papers came. He nodded. "So what now? Now I write the final line?" That night I sent one email to the Crown prosecutor. Subject, victim statement, and prosecution stance. I do not require a public trial to know what happened, but others might. And if this is what it takes to stop it repeating, I will testify. Under oath, under light, let them be seen. 3 days later, the first article appeared. Emotional asset schemes, targeting military families, under federal investigation. The photo was of Rachel blurred in cuffs. The byline, Erin Hall. She'd found her voice and her audience. Within hours, 3 more families came forward. One was from Newfoundland, another from Winnipeg, the third from Nanaimo. Different names, same strategy, same architects. FinTrack called it affinity-based structural fraud. The press called it love laundering. I just called it betrayal. LeBlanc updated me on the fallout. Rachel had retained a new lawyer separate from Gilmore and Pratt. Word was she'd turned over a file naming Marissa as the central architect. Dozens of spreadsheets, 2 offshore holding structures, recordings. "She's cutting loose," he said, trying to float. "Will it work?" "Maybe." I nodded, then asked the real question, will it matter? Later that week, I visited the storage unit I hadn't opened in over a year. Inside one box marked wedding, one marked deployments, a watch from my grandfather, letters from my mother, and at the bottom a sealed envelope in Rachel's handwriting. To open, if I don't come back. I opened it now. Inside, Travis. If you're reading this, it means the worst happened. And I don't know how to say this except that I'm sorry. For everything. I hope your next life is quieter than mine. Love, R. It was never meant for this moment, but somehow it fit. Some victories don't feel like winning. They feel like standing still while the storm finally stops. But the damage is already done. Now came the part I hadn't trained for: not search, not rescue, just answers. Rachel took the deal. Not quickly, not proudly, but deliberately. Her new counsel coordinated with federal agents. They drafted the immunity provision, then walked her through every question, every wire shell company, every contact with Marissa. It took 5 sessions, 2 full statements, 1 final recorded deposition. She cried once, not for me, for herself. I wasn't there for any of it. I got the transcript. She'd met Marissa at a Women in Leadership seminar in Toronto. The concept sounded noble: empowerment, financial independence, mobility. Marissa called it exit planning. Exit from what Rachel didn't say or didn't know. Daryl was introduced later, presented as a freedom logistics strategist. He helped streamline the legal work. By the time I deployed, Rachel had signed 7 documents I'd never seen, including a will, with my digital signature. The moment that broke me wasn't legal. It was simple. A question from the agent. Were you still emotionally committed to your marriage when you began this process? Rachel paused. Then, not really. But I still loved parts of it. The idea of it, like it was a costume or a houseplant, not a person. LeBlanc said the statement was invaluable. Gives us motive, gives us pattern, opens the door to trace funding from Marissa's shell firms. And what does it give her, I asked. He looked tired. A conditional deal, partial immunity. She helps, she walks, not clean, but not in chains. I nodded, didn't speak. After the 5th session, Rachel signed her deposition. She used her full name, Rachel Lynn Lambert, and initialed every page. LeBlanc told me over coffee. She named all 12 accounts, cross-linked 5 provinces. Every signature check passed. She was involved deep. But what she's giving us... He tapped his fingers on the folder. It could shut the whole operation down. I nodded, but my eyes were on the window. How do you feel? He asked. I didn't answer, because I didn't know yet. That night I read every word of her statement. There was nothing redemptive in it, no moment where she hesitated, no lines about guilt, only logistics. She met Marissa through a coworker. The seminar was framed as reclaiming your narrative. Daryl handled paperwork for transition planning. Logan Firth appeared as a valuation consultant. He estimated house values for sale under pressure. All very professional. All very rehearsed. She didn't say my name once. Not in the context of a person. Only as an account holder, a digital footprint, an obstacle. That was when I understood. Rachel didn't fall into something. She stepped into it, eyes open. 2 days later, I was called to sit with the assistant Crown prosecutor. Her name was Madeline Tan. 40-ish, sharp, wore her glasses low like they were a challenge. We're building a case against Marissa Kwan and her entities, she said. The testimony from Ms. Lambert accelerates our timeline. We want to move within the month. And Rachel, she stays out conditionally. She'll be subpoenaed as a cooperating witness. Will she walk? Madeline looked at me. She'll live differently. That's not nothing. Later that afternoon, a letter arrived. Handwritten, unmarked envelope. Travis, I didn't know how to face you. I still don't. But I thought maybe you'd want to hear this from me, not a transcript. I never meant to become that person. I really didn't. But at some point, I stopped recognizing myself. And then I just kept going. I don't expect forgiveness. But I wanted you to know I remember the first 5 years. And they were real. R. I folded the letter once. Didn't rip it, didn't keep it. Left it under a bridge where I used to run rescue drills. Let the rain decide what stayed. The media didn't waste time. A leak, likely internal, hit the wires. Ex-military wife cooperates in fraud, ring targeting deployed personnel. They didn't use Rachel's full name, but they didn't have to. Kingston wasn't big, and anyone with a Google search bar could connect the dots. A photo surfaced of her leaving the Fintrack building, coat wrapped tight, hair tucked in. No makeup, like she was trying to fold back into anonymity. I didn't send it to anyone, didn't comment, but I saved it, not as evidence, just to remember. Mateo knocked on my door that night. He had 2 beers and a look that meant don't lie. She really talk? I nodded. And she talked like a broker, like it was a transaction. He took a long sip. Sometimes I think people don't cheat for pleasure. They cheat for the illusion of options. And what do you think Rachel thought her options were? He didn't answer, and neither did I. A week later, I got called to a private briefing. Not courtroom, not press. Just a basement room in a government building with no nameplate. Inside were 4 people, Madeleine Tan Crown Regan, now reinstated as Special Investigator LeBlanc, and Aaron Hall. Her presence shocked me. She stood and shook my hand, firm, steady, no tears. She wore a Navy medallion around her neck, her late husband's. "You're why this didn't get buried," she said. "No," I said. "You're why it mattered." Reagan slid a folder across the table. "In the next 72 hours, we move on, Marissa. Warrants are ready, assets frozen, international requests submitted, but we need public backing. This goes to trial. We want the story told." I looked at Aaron. She nodded. "I'll testify. That night, I drove out to the lake, parked, sat in the silence. I didn't cry, didn't rage. I just listened. Waves didn't lie. People did. Some truths come quietly. Others arrive with sirens, subpoenas, and search warrants. And when it was Marissa's turn, they made sure she heard every second of it. The operation had a name, Silver Vein, code for how deep the scheme ran and how bright it looked on the surface. Marissa Kwan was arrested at a penthouse in downtown Vancouver. She didn't resist, didn't speak, just handed over her phone, turned her back, and held out her wrists like someone familiar with the choreography. Inside her suite, agents recovered 11 burner phones, 4 passports under 3 identities, 6 laptops, 3 ledgers handwritten, each coded 1 photo of her and Rachel, smiling, unlabeled, unframed. Back in Kingston, I received a call from Reagan. She was calm, he said, almost bored. She knows she won't do time. She knows how to spin delay. She'll push for dismissal. Challenge jurisdiction claim everything was consensual. She won't get far. No, Reagan said, not this time. But Marissa had one last move. 2 days before arraignment, her legal team submitted a 64-page narrative defense detailing her personal trauma, cultural isolation, and a theory that every transaction she oversaw was under client instruction. In other words, I didn't build the machine, I just oiled it. But LeBlanc wasn't fazed. He leaned across the table at the prep session and dropped a single USB. Audio files, he said, 27 hours. Wiretaps from her seminars. The room went silent. She says, "Freedom begins when you divorce the illusion of loyalty." That's her opener. First line, every time. The recordings weren't grainy. They were pristine. Clear enough that you could hear the ice in her glass when she paused for water. "I'm not here to break up marriages," Marissa said in one session. "I'm here to unmask delusion." She went on calm as a surgeon. Statistically, men in uniform betray first. Financially, emotionally, spiritually. What we're doing here isn't theft. It's correction. Women clapped. Rachel's voice was in the background of 2 sessions. She didn't speak, but she was there. That was the match. But what lit the fire were the victims, Aaron Hall testified. So did a woman named Amira Patel, divorced from a Coast Guard officer she said she still loved, and Maria Quintero, whose case file was used in one of Marissa's slide decks as a recovery case study. Slide 18, How to Regain Autonomy from Traditional Dynamics. Maria's face, blurred but not enough. Her words quoted, her email hacked. The public backlash came in waves. Freedom fraud trended for 3 straight days. Military support groups issued statements. A class action lawsuit was drafted. The base commander in Trenton ordered a formal internal review of spouse access protocols. But the real collapse came when Logan Firth flipped. The broker who evaluated homes under duress. He handed over emails, wire transfers, a list of preferred legal contacts, all women who'd quietly guided divorce proceedings under the table. One email, if he's away, we don't delay. Marissa's bail was denied. Too many passports, too many burned women, too many dots connected. She didn't weep in court, didn't even blink. She watched, measured. And when she was remanded, she leaned to her lawyer and whispered something only the stenographer caught. Let's see if he testifies. The he was me. Back home, I received a voicemail. Unlisted number. Rachel's voice quiet. I know you probably hate me. I deserve that. But please know, I didn't know how big it was. Not at first. Not like this. I was angry and lost. And someone handed me a map that felt like power. I'm sorry, Travis. I didn't delete it. Didn't respond either. Some things don't need closure. They need containment. The Crown released a list of confirmed consulting partners linked to Marissa. 15 names, 12 women, 3 men. Every one of them had facilitated a transition from shared assets to shell companies, from home to silence, from trust to ledger lines. And each had claimed it was just coaching. That was the word that bled through every deposition. Coaching. Coaching didn't explain the offshore transfers, or the photo of Marissa in Panama with a known cryptocurrency launderer, or the WhatsApp messages bragging about clean exits and flipping real estate like guiltless stock. Those weren't strategies. They were scalps. One afternoon, LeBlanc met me at a diner near the courthouse. You still on the fence about testifying? I didn't look up from my coffee. I'm not sure if it changes anything. It will for them, he said, handing me a file. Inside photos of men like me. Different faces, same posture. Their wives had signed with Marissa, and they'd come home to empty houses, cleared accounts, locked doors. Only difference. None of them had cameras. None of them had saved the evidence. You're the anchor, LeBlanc said. The case holds because you refused to vanish. That night, I stood in my hallway staring at the one framed photo I hadn't taken down yet. Me and Rachel in Banff. Snow in her lashes. Laughter I hadn't heard in years. For the first time in months, I said her name out loud, just once, soft, like a memory I could afford to lose. 3 days before the pretrial, I received a request to meet with the Department of Defense liaison. He wasn't military police, not OSI, just a man in a gray suit who used the word optics more than comfort. There's interest in your testimony, he said, especially from leadership. Why? Because your case cuts across perception, loyalty, reputation. If it looks like the military can't even protect its own, we have a morale crisis. So, I'm not just a victim, I'm a symbol. He didn't deny it. You were supposed to fall apart, he said flatly. You didn't. After he left, I opened the drawer beside my bed. Inside Rachel's wedding ring. I didn't keep it as a relic. It wasn't sacred, but it was part of the record, evidence, proof of something that used to be honest before it became leverage. I placed it inside a padded envelope, sealed it, and wrote, Crown Exhibit Submission, Item R01. Let the court have it. I didn't need it anymore. That evening, Aaron Hall called. They want me on day 2 of testimony, she said. They're building the timeline around you. Why not the other way? Because the whole case began when someone finally documented betrayal with precision. That's you, Travis. I swallowed. What if I break you won't? Because you already did. And you're still standing. Some fights are won with evidence, others with presence. And when the doors to that courtroom opened, I wasn't just walking into a trial. I was walking into everything we used to be. The room was colder than I expected. Or maybe it was just the weight of 30 eyes watching, waiting for me to take the stand. The clerk swore me in. Right hand raised, voice steady, pulse not so much. Crown Counsel Madeline Tahn started gently. Mr. Whitlock, when did you first notice irregularities in your joint finances? I answered with dates, numbers, facts, not feelings. They came later. She moved to the evidence, screenshots, transactions, forged refinance forms. Then the house cameras. Frame by frame, Rachel, Daryl, Logan, laughter. The courtroom stayed silent. No gasps, just pens moving, truth being transcribed. Finally, Madeline asked, what compelled you to start recording? I paused, because something inside me stopped believing I was being paranoid, and started accepting I was being erased. From the defense table, Rachel flinched, small, but real. It was the first time she looked up at me. No pity, no anger, just recognition of what we were, what we lost, what she broke. The defense counsel tried to poke holes, suggested I was monitoring Rachel, that my deployment distance created misinterpretations. I didn't argue. I just said if distance breaks a marriage, it doesn't steal bank accounts. Rachel was called the next morning. She wore gray, no makeup, no wedding ring, just a simple blouse with sleeves she kept tugging at. The clerk asked her to state her name. Rachel Lynn Lambert, she said softly, then silence. The judge waited. Everyone waited, until Madeline Tahn began. Ms. Lambert, do you recognize the man seated to my left? Yes. Who is he to you? Rachel's voice cracked, not in drama, but fatigue. He was my husband. The courtroom didn't shift. No gasps, no tension, just gravity. Madeline continued. Were you aware that assets were being transferred during his deployment? Rachel nodded. At what point did you realize the actions you were taking might be unethical? Rachel took a breath. When I saw myself on the security footage. A pause. I looked happy. Too happy. And it didn't make sense because I knew I was doing something wrong. But I liked the version of me in that video. Confident, in control. And I thought maybe I could just be her. The courtroom stayed still. Even the court reporter's fingers slowed. Did you ever stop to consider the impact of your actions on Mr. Whitlock? I tried not to, Rachel admitted. Why? Because it made me feel small. Like the villain in a movie I didn't know I'd been cast in. Travis didn't react, didn't twitch, didn't flinch. Because by now the wound wasn't raw. It was a scar, closed, calloused. And scars don't scream. They just sit there waiting to be noticed. On cross-examination, Rachel's lawyer tried to soften her role, blaming Marissa, the stress, the pandemic, aftershocks. But it didn't land, because the jury wasn't listening for excuses. They were listening for ownership, and Rachel gave it. By the end of her testimony, she looked over just once toward Travis. He didn't look away. But he didn't nod either. That was mercy enough. That evening, Aaron Hall texted, "You were dignified. You didn't make it about revenge. That matters." Travis replied, "It was never about revenge. It was about remembering I still existed." The next witness was an Army psychologist, not mine, but someone assigned to review behavioral patterns among targeted victims. She outlined patterns. Words like disenfranchised trust, emotional incapacitation deployment, induced vulnerability. But when she spoke about me, she said something simple. Mr. Whitlock didn't just recover his assets. He reasserted his existence. That's not common. The gallery was full that day. Not press, not bloggers, military wives, veterans, reservists, even two people I hadn't seen since my wedding. They didn't speak to me, didn't need to. Their presence said enough. This wasn't just my reckoning. It was ours. The judge called for a recess before closing remarks. As I stepped out, Rachel was waiting near the corridor. "I'm not asking for anything," she said. "Not pity, not contact, not even closure." I didn't speak. She continued. "But if you ever wonder whether I felt it, losing you, I did." I looked at her. Not with anger, not even hurt, just recognition of someone who used to be part of my story and no longer was. That night, I sat with Aaron Hall at a cafe near the courthouse. "I keep thinking I'll feel better when it's done," I said. "You won't," she replied. "Not for a while, but you'll feel true, and that's enough for now." Some stories end in applause, some in silence. Ours ended in a sentence, but not the kind written in ink, the kind that leaves a weight. The courtroom was half full the day of sentencing, enough to feel public, not enough to feel seen. Marissa received 8 years, no parole for 5. Charges: fraud, conspiracy, laundering, forgery. The judge called her conduct deliberate, profit-driven, and exploitative of national service. She didn't blink, didn't speak, just nodded like someone who'd already made peace with a fall. Logan got 5, Daryl 3 reduced for cooperation. 2 others pled out. Rachel wasn't charged, but she wasn't spared either. The judge ruled her ineligible for spousal support. Frozen assets remained under Crown seizure until full restitution, and her name was no longer on our house, our records, or my future. After court, she approached me outside. "I won't send anything else," she said. "No calls, no notes." "Good," I replied, "but I want you to know I kept one thing." "What's that?" She reached into her coat, pulled out a photo. Banff. The same one I used to keep framed. I didn't keep it because of me. I kept it to remember who I used to be before I forgot what mattered. Then she walked away. A week after sentencing, I received a letter. Not email, not typed, handwritten. From the Department of Defense. Inside, a commendation for cooperative excellence in multi-jurisdictional legal proceedings. And a note from the Chief of Operations. "You reminded us that serving isn't just about protecting borders. It's about protecting each other, even when the threat is inside the house." I didn't frame it, didn't post it, but I kept it, tucked behind a drawer in my nightstand, next to my deployment tags and a dried maple leaf I'd picked up the day before the hearing. 3 days later, I visited the house one last time. It was no longer legally mine. Sold at auction. Proceeds redirected to a victims fund for others caught in Marissa's web. But the yard still held Scout's favorite stick. The window still had a faint smudge from Rachel's old morning routine. I didn't go inside. I just stood on the porch, closed my eyes, and said goodbye. In April, I moved to St. Andrews. Small town, Atlantic wind. Fewer memories. I bought a cabin near the bay, 2 rooms, no Wi-Fi, plenty of time. Scout took to the trails fast. So did I. There's a bakery where the old man calls everyone kid. A local hardware shop run by 2 sisters who fight about everything except pricing. Sometimes I help them patch drywall. Sometimes they bring me cinnamon rolls. I still get letters. One from Maria Quintero, one from Aaron Hall. Both said the same thing. We stood because you didn't fall. And sometimes, on colder nights, I replay the hearings in my head not to relive them, but to remember that silence doesn't mean surrender. Rachel sent one last message. A letter. No return address. Inside, thank you for not destroying me when you could. I'm trying to become someone I wouldn't leave either. I didn't write back, but I didn't burn it either. Some truths belong in boxes, not because they matter, but because they once did. In early June, I got a visit. Not expected, not announced. Mateo. He stood on my porch in St. Andrews with 2 coffees and a folded map. I was in Halifax for a seminar, he said. Figured I'd keep driving. We didn't talk about Rachel, or the trial, or Marissa. We talked about the lake, the trails, the bread that never rises right in Atlantic humidity. Then before he left, he said, "You didn't just survive, Travis. You ended something that eats people. That's a kind of legacy most of us don't even dare to want." Later that week, I opened my laptop for the first time in months, not for news, just curiosity. I searched my name, then hers, then Marissa's, and then closed it all again. Because sometimes healing isn't forgetting. It's choosing not to reopen the wound just to check if it still bleeds. The Veterans Network asked if I'd speak at a panel. I declined. Not because I wasn't ready, but because the story wasn't mine anymore. It belonged to those still in it. Men who were just now opening suspicious emails. Women who just now realized they'd been coached into silence. Fathers explaining to their kids why home didn't feel like home anymore. One evening I built a bench facing the bay. Took me 5 hours. 3 splinters. And one memory of my dad fixing the deck every spring, cursing at every rusty nail. When it was done, I sat. Scout curled up at my feet. The wind shifted. And for the first time since Kandahar, since Rachel's email, since the courtroom, I let myself breathe without bracing. And it felt like peace. Not loud, not triumphant, but honest. In late summer, I got a package from the Department of Veterans Affairs. No return name, just the seal and my old rank. Inside, a plaque for upholding integrity under adversity. Sergeant Travis Whitlock. There was also a handwritten note from someone I'd never met. My brother served in Petawawa. His wife got tangled in Marissa's network. You probably never met him, but you saved his house. He's got 3 kids. They still sleep in the same rooms because of you. I didn't cry. Not because I didn't feel it, but because the ache had become something quieter than tears. Something like honor. Scout barked at a squirrel that evening. I let him chase it. He ran like he remembered what freedom was. I watched like I was starting to. The next morning I opened a fresh notebook. On the first page, I wrote one sentence: survival isn't about outlasting pain. It's about outgrowing who you had to be to endure it. Then I closed it. That was enough for now. Some storms don't pass. They just drift far enough for you to breathe again. After the courtroom cleared and names faded from headlines, I thought the silence would feel like peace. But silence isn't peace. It's a space. And spaces get filled by memory, by questions, by strangers reaching for answers. Her name was Paulina Vang. A freelance investigative journalist with ink-stained thumbs and a stare that never blinked too soon. She reached out with a message. I think we were almost in the same trap. Only difference, I backed away. You broke it. I didn't answer at first. A week later, she showed up at my door. No microphone, no film crew, just a thermos of strong coffee and a folder thicker than any military file I'd ever seen. I brought fuel and paperwork, she said. You brought clarity. We sat on the porch. She talked. I listened. Then I talked. And she didn't flinch. Paulina had spent the last 8 months chasing ghosts, financial loopholes, fake loan officers, untraceable property transfers. All tied back to the same pattern military spouses targeted while their partner served. She wasn't doing it for clicks. Her brother had almost lost his house. Same unit, same base, same scheme. He got suspicious, she said, asked too many questions, got cut loose by his wife, but at least he got to keep his home. Her eyes flicked over to me. You didn't just keep your home, you exposed the architecture. She wanted to build a podcast, a limited series. She called it Ashes and Echoes. Because this whole story is smoke and memory, but also resonance. What you did echoes. I told her I wasn't a talker, that my silence had been my armor. Paulina just nodded. Then let it be armor for someone else. We'll record 1 episode. You speak your truth. No edits, no music, just your voice. I don't know why I said yes. Maybe because I was tired of being silent. Maybe because someone had finally asked with no angle in their voice. A week later, we recorded. 1 mic, 1 porch, 1 story. I told it in sequence from the deployment, the email, the money, the video footage, the trial, and the part no one ever asked about, what it feels like to be erased by someone who once memorized your breathing. Paulina didn't interrupt, didn't prompt, just let the air settle after every phrase. When I finished, she clicked stop and said, "That's the most brutal hour I've ever recorded." I didn't ask if that was good. 3 weeks later, the episode aired. By noon, my inbox had collapsed. By dusk, the podcast hit #1 across the country. And that's when the letters started coming. I thought that was it. 1 microphone, 1 porch, 1 hour, spilled into the cold air, then silence. But sometimes silence isn't an end. It's an invitation. And in that pause, something rippled through inboxes, households, base kitchens, and borrowed cars parked outside courtrooms. My voice had traveled farther than I ever had in uniform, and people were listening. 3 days after the episode aired, Paulina's inbox imploded. She moved to a backup email, then brought in a friend to help manage the flood. By the 5th day, they'd enlisted a full team of volunteers just to sort through thank you letters. Not fan mail, letters from families, military wives, husbands, parents, people who had never spoken publicly but suddenly had everything to say. A woman in Winnipeg sent a photo of her former home, now repossessed. I couldn't save it, she wrote. But because of your podcast, I know I wasn't crazy. A retired soldier in Thunder Bay messaged to say he'd always felt ashamed for not seeing the signs when his wife started pulling away. But you made it out, he wrote. So maybe I wasn't weak, just human. Ashes and Echoes wasn't just a podcast anymore. It became a movement. Travis Whitlock wasn't a person. He was a signal flare. National papers reframed the court case not as a betrayal story, but as evidence of a system that bruises in silence behind the uniform. CTV News launched a special feature, The Home Front Wounds, profiling other families fractured by financial sabotage during deployments. CBC brought Paulina onto a late-night roundtable. The host asked why she let Travis narrate his own story uncut. Paulina's answer was brief: because true pain doesn't need help to sound loud. The Canadian Armed Forces made no public comment, but internally change was clear. Quiet memos were circulated, audits of service member accounts, cross-checks on joint holdings. Legal advisors flagged known patterns. Some bases even created home leave counselor roles, part therapist, part watchdog. The private school where Rachel taught saw a different kind of reckoning. No protests. No letters, just a quiet exodus of students. Over 2 months her class emptied, her contract was not renewed. She found occasional work as a substitute, then moved to freelance tutoring. Less money, less scrutiny. Maybe what she needed. Travis received a handwritten note from Whitehorse, no name, no return address. You didn't save me, but you made me stop hating myself. It was the shortest letter of them all, but the one he kept folded in his wallet, not framed, not shared online, just something to touch when his hands forgot what calm felt like. One morning after walking Scout down by the shore, Travis stopped by the town's post office. A parcel waited, no sender listed. Inside, a handmade wooden guitar, whittled roughly but with care. A note. For no reason at all. We heard your voice and figured you probably needed one. Travis had never played guitar. That night he tried. One string was off. Another snapped. He didn't fix it. He just laughed. Because for the first time in years, he felt like someone who could learn something new. Not to prove anything, not to reclaim anything, just to try. When the final episode of the podcast aired, Paulina texted him. Are you doing okay? He replied, I don't dream about the courtroom anymore. And that was enough. They called it closure. The articles, the think pieces, the headlines. But closure implies a door shut gently. This wasn't gentle, and it wasn't over. Because even as the world moved on, I was still living in the after, still holding the quiet debris. It came in an envelope with no return address. The handwriting was too careful to be anonymous. I recognized the way she looped her lowercase I. Inside 10 pages, not an apology, not an explanation, not a plea. It was a journal entry, or maybe a confession. Rachel had written it the week after the trial ended, dated each day, tracked her thoughts like evidence. She didn't speak of love, didn't try to rewind time. She wrote about the silence, about waking up each morning with no texts, no footsteps, no risk of consequence. How the quiet felt like drowning in clean water. She admitted that she hadn't loved Daryl, not even liked him really. She said he made her feel powerful until she realized power without purpose is just destruction dressed up. She admitted she'd seen the forged documents and signed anyway, not because she believed in the scam, but because she'd convinced herself it was already too late. By the time I noticed how far I'd drifted, she wrote I was too far out to see the shore. She didn't ask for forgiveness, didn't mention the house or Scout. She only said one thing that stayed with me. I thought survival meant winning. You showed me it means walking away before you become what breaks you. I didn't write back, didn't even reread the letter. I folded it, sealed it in a new envelope, and buried it in the back of my file drawer, not to preserve it, but to keep it from chasing me. That night I sat by the fire, Scout asleep at my feet, the guitar untouched in the corner, and I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Not happiness, not relief, just a strange, aching neutrality, like pain that had been acknowledged so fully it had nothing left to say. Some stories end in courtrooms, some in silence. Mine. It ended in a classroom, not because justice had been served, but because a boy with ink on his fingers asked a question I didn't expect. The email came from a local teacher in Sussex. She ran a civics program for Year 6 students' truth ethics and citizenship. She asked if I'd come speak. I don't want them to hear war stories, she wrote. I want them to hear about quiet courage. I almost said no. Then I thought about that guitar, that fire, that silence that no longer hurt. So I said yes. The classroom was bright chaotic and smelled faintly of glue sticks. The kids sat in a circle, eyes wide, unsure if I was a guest speaker or a warning. I didn't bring notes, didn't wear my uniform. I just told the truth. About decisions that ripple. About betrayal that doesn't always look violent. About survival that feels like rebuilding a house with one hand. At the end, a boy with chipped blue nail polish raised his hand. Are you happy now? I paused. Smiled not because I had the answer, but because I didn't flinch from the question. I'm not sure, I said, but I feel lighter, and that I figured was a start. That evening after the school visit, I walked to the edge of the town wharf, just Scout and me and the low hush of water lapping against the posts. I watched the horizon fade into a slate blue line. Something about it reminded me of those weeks before deployment when everything felt stretched between what had been and what could no longer be undone. I told a room full of children about mistakes, about choice, about walking away without a fight, and how sometimes that's braver than staying for one. And it wasn't until I saw my own reflection, in the water older, quieter weathered, in ways I hadn't noticed, that I realized something else. This life, this quiet life, I'd been building piece by piece. It didn't need to feel triumphant. It just needed to be mine. Back at home, I opened the guitar case. The broken string was still curled like a question mark. I replaced it, not because I suddenly wanted to play, but because I wanted to learn something new. And starting with a small repair felt like the right way to honor that. I played one chord. It sounded wrong. Then I tried again, slightly better. The rhythm of that moment stayed with me, not the music, but the effort, the permission to be bad at something again, to try without expectation. Weeks later, Paulina sent me a link. A foundation had launched in my name. Not my idea. I hadn't been consulted. But it was already up, the Whitlock Initiative, a fund for military families experiencing legal and financial coercion. Anonymous support, legal advice, emergency lodging. Your story opened the door, Paulina wrote. This keeps it open. I stared at the screen a long time. Didn't cry, didn't smile, just let the moment settle like dust after a long wind. Then I closed the laptop, went outside, and threw the ball for Scout until he dropped from joy. Some stories end with applause, others with headlines, camera flashes, or a final punchline. Mine ended on a Tuesday morning with fresh snow dusting the porch and Scout snoring by the fire. Not because the story had run out, but because I'd stopped needing it to prove anything. The noise had faded, and for the first time in years, the silence felt earned, not empty. The Whitlock Initiative was no longer just a link on Paulina's website. It had grown into a national fund, managed by veterans, staffed by spouses, reviewed by lawyers who knew the sound of silence in a courtroom. They set up a 24-hour helpline, anonymous, bilingual, confidential. One night, a 23-year-old corporal in Moose Jaw called in. His wife had emptied their joint account while he was stationed in Gagetown. He had no proof, No plan, just fear. They walked him through the steps, paused when he cried, reassured him when he thought no one would believe him. He didn't lose his home. And 2 weeks later, he mailed a letter. I thought strength meant silence. Turns out it means knowing when to ask for help. Thank you, sir. You showed me that being ready doesn't have to mean being alone. It sat on my windowsill for months, not framed, just there. Some legacies are public, etched into websites, quoted in articles. Others arrive quietly years later in the voice of someone you used to dream about, now reduced to a phone number blinking on a silent screen. It had been nearly a year. The last time I heard Rachel's voice was in a voicemail I never played. This time she didn't leave one. She called again, then once more, and finally I picked up. "Hi," she said. Her voice was soft, smaller than I remembered. I didn't answer. "I'm not calling to fix anything," she added. "I know that's not possible." Still, I stayed on the line. She told me she'd moved back to her mother's in Kingston, that she was teaching part-time, that she'd started journaling. Not for publication, not for therapy, just to find where her voice had gone. "I don't expect forgiveness," she said. "I just wanted to say, I see it now. What you carried, what I didn't." There was a long pause. "I hope Scout's okay," she added. "He's slowing down," I said. Then after another silence, "I hope you find your quiet." "I'm working on it," she whispered. And that was the last time we spoke. Some people say closure is a letter or a final conversation, but sometimes it's simpler than that. A new key, a smaller porch, and the sound of no one needing anything from you anymore. I sold the house in the valley, not because of the memories, not even because of the cost, because it was too close to everything that had burned and too far from everything I was becoming. I bought a small cabin near Lake Temagami. No streetlights, no neighbors, just trees that creaked in winter and sang in summer. Scout adjusted faster than I did. He found the sunny spots, the chipmunks, the familiar scents. His legs moved slower now, but his ears still twitched at the sound of my guitar. Yes. I'd kept playing, just enough to learn 3 songs, never the sad ones. I built furniture in the mornings, simple chairs, small shelves. I started donating them to the local youth camp where kids painted them wild colors and gave them names. Sometimes the camp counselors would ask me to speak, just 5 minutes, about resilience, about silence, about how healing isn't linear and strength doesn't always roar. I never brought notes, never used the word betrayal. One summer evening, a boy raised his hand. "What do you do when someone breaks your trust?" I paused. Then said, "You don't fix them. You build something they can't break." That night I sat by the lake, Scout at my feet, a chair I didn't need beside me, and I felt not finished, but finally whole. You've heard the story, not because it was louder than others, but because someone somewhere might need proof that survival isn't always heroic. Sometimes it's just quiet and hard and slow. This isn't about betrayal or punishment. It's about what happens after the echo, when the house is quiet, when no one is watching, when all that's left is a person and the choice to stay broken or rebuild. Not everyone gets justice, but everyone deserves safety. So if something feels off, if someone you love has gone quiet, not peaceful but afraid, ask twice. Stay through the pause. And listen longer than is comfortable, because courage doesn't always knock. Sometimes it whispers. You don't have to break to be brave, and no one heals alone. For resources, support, or to share your story, www.whitlockinitiative.ca. a national support line for Canadian military families, navigating silent sabotage or separation. You're not the only one. Not anymore.